It's clearly very different from the nature of border crossings and the border generally with Mexico. I don't want to go off on a tangent here, but something really bothers me. A couple of years ago, I mean, I do a lot of work on economic development and international trade. I've written about I really believe that this North American Free Trade Agreement has been good for everybody, Canada, United States, and Mexico. And I was crossing into Mexico in Nogales about 2 years ago. And I thought I was in Berlin in the 1980s before the came down. You know, what you see is layer upon layer of fencing and concertina wire and these 20, 30-foot high fences. And I thought, these are our NAFTA pals. This is ridiculous. If I were a Mexican national, I would be absolutely offended. We have this economic union, but it's not being accompanied by a, what's the term I'm looking for? By a migration policy or human resource policy that accommodates the reality of this North American marketplace.
I want to make sure they got pencils, because that should some questions coming right there. Yes.
Probably to all three. What is the primary motive for the anti-immigration movement? Is it racism? Is it animism? And is it xenophobia? Thank you.
Gary, we'll start with you.
Please repeat the question.
The question was, what is the main reason for the anti-immigration movement? Is it racism, xenophobia, whatever? Or is there another reason for this anti-movement?
I could just speak to the question from my professional perspective. I've been in the civil rights business for almost 30 years now, and every time there's an influx of a new group of persons, of course, in the South we've been dealing with segregation based upon race. We just finished a couple of big litigations. We're still dealing with the racial issues. When the boat people came over from Vietnam and Cambodia, we dealt with those issues in terms of discrimination, the sentiment. Now it seems like there's a lot of popularity in terms of discrimination against new immigrant populations coming from south of our border. Now, believe me, it's not restricted to white people discriminating against, or really white, non-Hispanic people discriminating against Hispanics from Mexico or Guatemala. We have situations where Mexican persons from Mexico will discriminate against people from Guatemala. In New Mexico, we have situations where we've got people with Spanish surnames that will discriminate against people from Mexico. One of the biggest, I guess, one of the bigger groups of processes of discrimination in Mexico is against Cubans. So it's not restricted to any particular group. It's usually, it boils down to, and this is an opinion which I'm not supposed to express, it boils down to haves and the have-nots. Who has something they want somebody else to have, and that's where our office comes in. That's where discrimination comes in. I think probably it gets shared in education and economics.
Well, you mentioned earlier that we are a nation of immigrants, but is it that once we get here, we don't want anybody else in?
I think from a fair housing perspective, that's why we have national origin. National origin came into law not particularly because of a Hispanic, non-Hispanic issue. It came in terms you had these ethnic neighborhoods on the East Coast where you're Polish, you weren't moving to the Irish neighborhood. I mean, a lot of different types of discrimination. Down here, we kind of look at it from a Hispanic, non-Hispanic, but in other parts of the country, the other issues are different groups. In San Francisco, it's Chinese versus everybody else in terms of the forms of discrimination.